YouTube Ozzico in the Goat House is back with some more NFL offseason content. Today, we're focused on the AFC North. We're going through each team. I'm going to make some cuts, seeing what players they possibly can cut, who I think they will cut, players they can't cut, and we'll take a look at the cap space situation for these teams and see if we can kind of fix it, improve it. We're doing this for every single team. We're going division by division. We have the AFC and NFC East videos already up. This is the AFC North, NFC North later today. 2 divisions a day. You guys know the drill by now probably, and we got full NFL coverage on the channel, a lot more on the way as well. Constant NFL talk and news on our Twitter. Check it out. Link in the description, comments for anything that you need. Subscription would be much appreciated. And then there's that Twitter. You guys are voting on which divisions I should do tomorrow, but don't worry, we'll get through every one by the 30th. So yeah, check out that Twitter and get involved in polls like these, decisions for the channel. For this video, we're using this website called Spotrac. I never know what it is, but it's a very cool site. Yeah, they kind of have the cap space already with all the makes it a lot easier with the cap figures. Something to keep in mind, this is kind of the cap space. This is the cap space with if the team cap space is $175 million, which is projected, but I'm thinking it could be a little more. So this is kind of worst case scenario before we make the cuts. These numbers here for these teams, it's kind of worst case going into the offseason, and we'll try to see what we can do here. But for the Ravens, the Steelers are kind of the big one, so we're saving the Steelers for the end there, just because they got to clear some space, some things going on with Big Ben's contract. But the Ravens don't really have players, they could cut. $18 million, 18.8 worst case scenario. It's a pretty good worst case scenario compared to the rest of the league because everyone's in cap space nightmares, I guess if you want to call it. But the Ravens, yeah, not too many guys they can cut. You start to look at the defensive line. It's getting up there in age. Look at 35, 32. But these guys, they just traded for Calais Campbell. He was such a key addition for them. Just to see, they're not going to cut him, but just to show $5 million they can clear if they cut him. Brandon Williams has been a big time nose tackle for them. They could save $7.5 million, but yeah, big piece of stopping the run there on that defense that stops the run at a very high level. So that's pretty tough. Nick Boyle, they could look to replace him in the draft. There's a guy like Tommy Tremble from Notre Dame, where I think he has Ravens writ all over him. And if they are able to do that, then they can, potentially cut a guy like Nick Boyle, but he's another key piece. They like him. $5.5 million they could save, so it's a decent amount of money. A guy like Tavon Young, they can't really cut. Yeah, negative. That's negative cap right there. You don't want that. So they don't have too many options. I mentioned LJ Ford, who's a solid player for them. Played a bit. They do have Malik Harrison. So it's kind of just up to the Ravens. If they just want to kind of force Harrison in there more to grow with Patrick Queen, and could they cut a guy like LJ Ford? It's really not ideal, probably, with 2.25. If they're in a situation where they have to make some cuts, Jimmy Smith had a really good year. Big fan of his game. He only saved $250,000, so there's no point. There's absolutely no point. And then you start to get down here. Anthony Averett's been a little disappointing, but you're not even saving enough. Still a young corner, part of the rotation. Yeah, we're starting to get into small savings here, so it's really not worth it. So coming away with not too much with the Ravens, and again, that $18 million is probably worst case. I'm thinking it's going to be, I think they're going to. Technically, they're going to drop the cap number, but people are kind of setting it at 175. I think it'll be a little higher than that. Therefore, I think teams will have more in that number there. Up to $25 million, I might be pushing it. So somewhere around there. And the problem is they got quite a few of edge rushers. Judon, Ngakoue, McPhee. Bowser was pretty good for them. Rotation-wise, pretty good in coverage for an edge rusher. They want to re-sign at least 2 of those guys, and that's going to run them out of cap space for this year. So they might have to make some tough cuts. They want to extend Lamar Jackson. That won't affect them this year unless they're able to push some money back with it, which I doubt that. But yeah, there's always restructures and guys taking pay cuts. That's pretty impossible to predict, but I will say a lot of these teams probably will find a way. to do it. You can create years after at the end of the guy's contract and kind of push some money, not all of it, but push some money back, to kind of save some space there. I mean, you can do it with any of these guys. You can drop some of these cap numbers down a little bit to do it. You can do it multiple. So teams probably will do that. So just kind of get an idea. But yeah, that's kind of tough because I don't have anybody for the Ravens here. They could, again, if they can find a replacement for Nick Boyle, cheaper, mid-rounds, maybe they want to save that. It's tough, though, because he's good. They like him. We'll see. Bengals, who have a pretty good amount of cap space against, that's worst-case scenario kind of going into the offseason, 34 cuts, $35.6 million. So that's pretty damn good. Trey Waynes, they signed that big contract, and he hasn't played for them yet, but I think he's a solid corner. So we'll see how he is this year. Geno Atkins could be cut. That's a big name to cut. Maybe they'll try to trade him, but cutting him $9.5 million, that's pretty good, But the question is, do they like him? I was going to say they like him, but do they? Because they didn't really want to trade him last year, so you think they like him. He's been a part of the Bengals organization for a long time, but they didn't really play him a whole bunch. They got DJ Reader coming back. He's the next most in cap hit. And, they can find somebody young to add in there. But, yeah, so they got a young roster, pretty young, talented roster here for the future. So, yeah, they could, in my opinion, they could afford him. And Geno Atkins not playing the same way he was a few years ago. They can afford to do this, so that's interesting. You look down the list. Could they move on from Bobby Hart? $5.8 million. It could be worth it there. They don't have too many cuts, but they're sitting in a pretty, B.J. Finney they just traded for. Was it during this last season? They can cut him and save 3.2. Billy Price has been disappointing, but is it worth cutting him? $2 million. You can make some cuts here with 5.2 million. For some reason, it's easier for me to read over there from a distance. There's just not too many guys down here that's really worth cutting. A couple of these, the offensive line, they got to make a decision on who they, Jonah Williams is going to play left tackle. Is he going to play guard? Who they're going to draft, and that kind of can affect the rest of the group too. Is it worth keeping these guys as rotations for, like we talked about Billy Price? Is it worth saving that money when they have money? Because offensive linemen are even rotation guys are pretty hard to come across. They're usually even expensive. So sometimes these guys that you view as, they're not too good, even like a Bobby Hart, not too great. They're pretty good rotation guys sometimes. So that's why that's a tough thing. So they got to sit down and figure out what they want to do with that offensive line, who they want to move around, and then we'll see who they draft. But yeah, these guys down here, all these teams will cut guys down here, some practice squad guys to save a little bit. But it's going to happen, but it's not going to save a whole bunch of money. So just to kind of get in the ballpark, they could save a decent amount of money here, getting around $60 million. That's kind of worst case if they cut all these guys. Moving on to the Browns. The Browns, I was under the impression that they would have more cap than this. And again, I do think that's worst case. I think they will end up having more than that. But this site that I trust, they kind of are usually ahead of the schedule in knowing, what cap spaces will look like here going into the offseason. So they're saying around $12 million. Again, I think the cap will be a little higher than they're projecting, so they'll have a little more. And it's a decent number to have. I thought it'd be better for the Browns. But the problem is, and the big storyline is Odell. It's always Odell. They're not going to cut him, but if they do cut him, they save about $3 million. They're not going to do that. People always bring up Odell in trades. It was like rumors during the year that he was going to the Vikings, I think it was. And it's just ridiculous. None of it was true. So it always comes up, and people want to know. What happens if they trade Odell Beckham Jr.? You save a whopping $15.7 million, but is it really necessary? Let's go ahead and reset this because we haven't traded right now, and I don't want that to be the final decision. Other guys, it's still reloading the page, but you look at these other guys, and there's not too many guys they can cut, and Njoku end up being a factor. If you look at, wish it would reset for us, but if you look at a guy like, where was I? You got like Chris Hubbard, who, we kind of just talked about that with the Bengals offensive line, the guys who are starters now. Chris Hubbard wasn't too good of a starter last year, but now is a key rotation, or not rotation, backup, to fill in. And, saving $2.7 million is not really worth it. You'd rather keep him around, risk putting another guy in there. He has to come in. Maybe he's not as good as Chris Hubbard there. So they would keep him. like Adrian Claiborne got some playing time because Olivier Vernon, got hurt at the end of the year, unfortunately, heading into the playoffs. Claiborne, $3 million. It's kind of the similar. There we go. Kind of a similar situation there. Let's find Claiborne again. Kind of a similar situation as Chris Hubbard. There, it's a pretty good rotation guy to have. Saving $3 million. Do you desperately need to save that $3 million to create another need, a rotation need there? So I don't know if it's really worth cutting him. So I don't know. The Browns really don't have. We didn't get to see Billings. They got him for it because they needed a nose tackle, true nose tackle. So we'll see how he does this year. These guys are pretty cheap. MJ Stewart took a shot, and he ended up being pretty decent, I thought, for them. But, he's not like a sure thing, but $1.1 million. I just don't know if, a lot of this is worth it. They can cut like Switzer. I mean, they're going to be saving, money like that, like prices like that there. So not too much to save for the Browns. And sometimes it's a good thing if you have a lot of money, a lot of cap, but their cap actually was less than I thought it would be. So we'll see. We'll see what the cap number ends up being, but see if they, if they feel like, we need to build this defense now because they're pretty much set on offense. So trade Odell, and then they can clear some things up to make some moves from some defensive players, but they're going to need a receiver then, in my opinion. So we'll see what they do there. So between the Ravens, Bengals, or the Ravens and Browns so far, not much you can do. Then it brings us to the Steelers, who are sitting at worst case scenario, but it's a ballpark number, of course, negative $29.8 million. That's very bad. One of the worst situations in football heading into the offseason, but will it end up as one of the worst situations? That's what we're here to figure out. We did the NFC East yesterday. The Eagles still kind of ended up in a pretty bad situation, one of the worst. So can the Steelers kind of dig themselves out of that? First, it comes with Big Ben. I mean, we can pull up his contract here. We can see the details in the contract where it currently sits once it comes up. We'll circle back to Big Ben. That's kind of the big question there. But Joe Hayden, Joe Hayden's a good veteran corner. Corners didn't really play that great this year. They're solid, but I think, the importance of for some reason that page, we're struggling here. The importance of that, that defense is really not corner. I think the pass rush will make the corners make them look a lot better. So you really shouldn't be spending a whole lot of money on cornerbacks unless you have the most cap space in football and you're able to get the best cornerbacks in football. So you see that cap hit right there. I mean, cutting them could save $12.6 million. I'd say that's worth it. They're not going to – I don't see them cutting both Hayden and Steven Nelson because then they have a major problem. But, again, it's a pretty big number, 8.2. They should not be investing that much money in corners unless it's a sure thing. These guys are top tier, and they're not. They're not going to cut both of them, but they may choose one or the other. Steven Nelson is, 28, and Joe Hayden's 32. So they could ultimately save more money cutting Joe Hayden. So create more money, I should say. So they could ultimately decide to do that. Eric Ebron could go. Well, we know Vance McDonald's going to be gone there. So that's, what is that, $5.2 million? We might have to pull up his contract as well. We got to dive deep into the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's already came up. So 2021. Yeah, I think they actually already took care of that. That's why this website's good. Let's see. I should have kept that up. Yeah, so they won't be hit with all that cap. They'll be hit, I believe, with the dead cap, the $2 million, unless they already adjusted that. I don't think they did. So if they $5.2 million here. I'm trying to do the math in my head here. I'm doing this on the spot. Yeah, they're hit with that 2 point. They're still got to pay that dead cap, that $2.7 million. Cutting Ebron, which they used him quite a bit. They did use him quite a bit, but kind of underwhelming at the same time. $6 million they can save by cutting him, so we're getting closer here, I suppose. But then you're creating needs. That's kind of the problem here. You're creating needs at cornerback, at tight end. But and you look further down the list, a lot of these guys aren't too expensive. It's mainly the guys at the top here. Maybe if they just don't view Mason, I doubt it, but if they just don't view Mason Rudolph as the guy they like as the backup, $1 million, perhaps. I just don't know if it happens. But kind of going to Big Ben, and you look at Big Ben's contract. He has 1 year left. He has a whopping cap hit of $41 million. Let's just show you something that's not going to happen. They can cut him and save $19 million, that's looking pretty. And if they're in position, because the Steelers always come up with, with quarterbacks, like Stafford, for some reason Watson, even though that's not possible probably, but being available via trade. The Steelers always come up, and if they're in position to get a guy like Stafford, which I don't think it's going to happen, I've kind of talked about that, then they can cut Big Ben. A lot of dead cap, but you're still saving and clearing this amount of money over here. So that if they were in position to get somebody, they could do that, but it's just not going to happen. So basically, we have to restructure his contract here, which is actually pretty good timing. It's come out within the last hour, I'd say, that Big Ben is going to be willing to restructure his contract. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean pay cut. He could take a pay cut and drop this cap hit down, in which they're going to need to come down quite a bit. Or, again, it doesn't necessarily mean pay cut. It means, restructure. They could create dummy years here, 2022. They can do it in 2023, 2024. I think it could go through 2025, 4 years. Yeah. And kind of take some of that money and push it back. Even if he's not on the team, or if they create those years, it doesn't mean he's under contract on the team. They're just creating extra years where they're paying him that money. So they could take some of that. Yeah, $19 million is the yearly cash there for Big Ben. So they could take not all of that. See, his base salary is at $4 million. So they can take some of that. I think that's likely to happen. It's going to be impossible to say. So what is this? 41.25. So I think. I think we could be talking about somewhere around 27 million. Keyboards over here if you haven't figured that out yet. Kind of just ballparking it there. Because they can use not all of that 19 million, but they can use some of that and kind of distribute it in the future. So if it's a pay cut, it's going to be more than that. It's going to be, they're not going to be able to subtract that much off the $41 million cap hit, because he's not going to take that big of a pay cut. He'd be willing to go down this far in this year because he's still getting that money in the future. So the pay cut would be it would be a higher cap figure than 27 million, if you understand. It gets all confusing, but so that really falls on the Steelers more so, because would they rather him take a pay cut so they're off the books in the future? They don't have to worry about those dummy years. They have a lot of space, though, the Steelers, just remembering that, in the future. So would they not want those dummy years and have more of a cap hit? They might rather have the dummy years, now that I'm thinking about it, and paying them in the future, to drop it down around this price. Again, I'm kind of ballparking that. I think we'll be in the range, but it's really tough to figure that out. But yeah, so that's something I think we can see. So we're in the positive here, but we did cut Joe Hayden and Eric Ebrahmer. Vance McDonald retired. What else can we do? I mean, DeCastro is such a key piece, just to see. Could save $8.7 million. That whole offensive line might need to be revamped for the most part. I just don't see them doing it. If they're sticking out with Big Ben another year, I think they'll stick around with DeCastro for another year. Can still play. Vince Williams feels like kind of a captain in there. But would they rather re-sign Spillane to pair with Devin Bush, cut Vince Williams $4 million? I don't know if that's worth it there. And kind of going down the list, yeah, these guys are definitely on the cheaper side. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they'll cut some of these guys to save a little bit of money, because a little bit of money is kind of a lot for them. So they can cut some guys here and there to clear a little bit. But you kind of get the idea here who they can cut. Or maybe you could play along in the comments who you think they will cut. I mean, what if they just go for it and they just cut all they're creating some pretty big needs then. But again, if you can find some good young corners that are cheaper, I think you can. Not even talking the draft, like free agency. I think they can find guys that are cheaper and better than these guys. I don't know. That's me maybe. But yeah, it's good news. Overall, this is good news for the Steelers. You're able to get in pre-cuts, this, I guess, probably the fourth worst situation in football. But then they're really boosting it up. You see that. We got them to positive, and this is kind of worst case if they make these cuts. So there's other teams that are kind of stuck down there. We went over the NFCs yesterday, like the Eagles. There's teams that are kind of stuck down there in cap space hell. So Steelers, good news for Big Ben coming out. That helps a lot too. They got some wiggle room. It will create needs though. Tight end, corner, we see they already have needs across the offensive line with some free agents. Bud Dupree's a free agent. Alex Highsmith could replace him. And then you're looking at running back as well, corner. We talked about that already. And then, who's going to fill that role? I mean, they kind of already had it with Vince Williams, but do they want Spillane back? So there's good and bad in there. There's good and bad. So we do this for every single team. This is the third division we went through, just to kind of give you an idea what we can expect. All these numbers are ballpark numbers, especially this year. Usually we're pretty dead on, but this year is just extremely confusing because the COVID situation creating the cap space to go down, and that number will be a mystery for now. We'll know it at some point after the Super Bowl, perhaps February. But just to kind of give you an idea here with these ballpark numbers and who teams can cut. But that's going to do it for this one. We got all kinds of NFL videos on the channel, plenty more to come. Subscribe, smash that like button, turn notifications on, all that, much appreciated. That's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.